Um, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. Thank you for joining the 2024 August entry application conversation with the directors. I am Jordan Blitzer, Director of Recruiting. I am joined by Morgan Janella, who is Director of Operations. And we're really thrilled to be here with you today as our application launched earlier this week. And we are excited to talk a little bit about some of the changes that have taken place this year for August 2024 entry. Okay, so a little bit about where we're going, what we're going to spend time talking about today. Introductions, check. I'm going to do a brief overview of our program offerings, as well as our application ins and outs, so to speak. Morgan will cover the application mechanics, and then we'll talk a little bit about some application tips that we have for you as directors who have combined been reviewing applications for 16 years together, right? 16 years. So we have a lot of knowledge, a lot of applications have been reviewed by these sets of eyes, and we're happy to share some tidbits with you. We are also going to have time towards the end for live Q&A. There are two members of our team who are here floating in the background, Nicole Newham and Nick Arroyo, who are going to be managing the Q&A box as we go through the session, but also will be saving some of the questions that they think are pertinent to the full group to give to us for live Q&A towards the end. Please keep in mind, there are many more of you than there are of them, so we may not get to every single question, but we're going to do our best to get to as many as possible. And also keep in mind that we have sort of mapped this session to be sure that we get at least the basic questions answered. So maybe consider holding your question towards the end, because it's highly possible we actually might cover it in the session today. So just big picture, you should know that this is not a full information session. We host full information sessions at least once a month virtually in a similar, setting to this, where we go through all of the MBA, and then there's also separate ones for our other programs, all of the things that you might want to know as an applicant for a Columbia MBA degree. But here, just, a big picture recap. We have two entry options here at Columbia Business School. The first is August entry, which is what we're really going to be focusing on here today, because a lot of the changes that we're going to be talking about really focus on the August entry application. But August is what you think of when you think of the sort of traditional two-year MBA. It's mapped here in the light green, I guess is what you would call that color. It's, a fall core semester, spring semester where you're doing core and electives. It's one core class in the second semester. Then you leave for the summer and do a summer internship and come back for year two doing all electives. This program is really for folks who are interested in potentially doing a career pivot, completely changing course on what they were doing before business school and want to try something different after business school. Again, it's more of what folks traditionally think of when they think of doing an MBA program. But we also have our January entry, which is 16 consecutive months of coursework, where you start in January with the core curriculum. You move through the summer doing coursework, finishing up that core and doing electives. And then you would, start the second year immediately in that August-September timeframe after having done classes over the summer, and join your August class, those who started in August, the classmates that started then, for electives for year two. January entry is really designed for folks who are maybe entrepreneurs, sponsored by their current company, or have deep networks within an industry that maybe they want to make more of a functional pivot as opposed to a industry change. A bigger jump that really is more geared towards our August entry. All right, so what do we look for? And this is true of pretty much every application we review. There are these three key buckets. I'm going to start at the top, not because there's any more emphasis on academic strength, but we are going to look at how you did in undergrad, what your transcripts look like in whatever classes or major you chose. You do not need to have a business undergrad or business adjacent undergrad degree to be successful in our classroom. So how did you do in the classes you chose to take? We do require a standardized test, either the GMAT, GRE, or EA. You do not have to take all three. Please pick the one that works best for you and your strengths. And we will need to have that submitted by the time the application deadline hits in order for your application to be complete. Moving down the circle, professional promise. A professional resume tends to be about 1 page for every 10 years of work experience. So for most folks on the call today, we recommend trying to keep your resume to 1 page. Letters of recommendation, and the reason it's parentheses is because if you're applying to CBS only, it's 1 letter of rec. If you're applying via the consortium, it is 2. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into the mechanics of the application timeline. A short post-MBA goal, it's almost tweet-like, 50 characters that you then elaborate on in essay 1, which we will also talk about in the next slide. So I'm going to jump over that for a second and also jump over the interview and move to personal characteristics. We're going to be assessing what you've done both extracurricularly after undergrad and during your undergraduate career, and how you spend your time. What type of community contributor might you be at Columbia Business School? And then essays 2 and 3, like I said, we're going to talk about in the next slide, so I'm going to jump over those, but those are really ways for us to get to know you as a person a little bit more, as opposed to what your professional path may look like. But it's all sort of intertwined. We'll talk about that. The interview, as you can see, is under the 2 buckets, personal characteristics and professional promise, and that is because they're behavioral type interviews, typically conducted by an alum, most likely virtually at this stage, given the post-COVID world we live in. And the only pieces of information that the alum will have will be your resume and then whatever you choose to share with them. So that's why it sort of lives between the personal characteristics and professional promise bucket, because it sort of straddles both. All right, so I alluded to this on the previous slide. There are 3 essays. Again, regardless of whether you're applying for January entry or August entry, they are the same. So maybe some of you have already started thinking about these essays here, but you can see they're sort of mapped. Generally speaking, essay 1 is supposed to give us a sense of what you want to do in the short term and the long term. This is not a new essay question by any means. It's sort of the one, I think, in all my years of being at CBS that has been the same. Essays 2 and 3 are questions that we've asked in the past, but some of them we're bringing back. So essay 2 is about Phillips Pathway for Inclusive Leadership, which is a co-curricular program designed actually by alums to help students develop as inclusive leaders. So we're asking you to think about 5 inclusive leadership skills and describe a time or situation in which you had to utilize one or more of them. And the actions that you took and the outcomes. So giving us perspective around how you've had to mitigate bias and prejudice, manage intercultural dialogue, address systemic inequity, understanding identity and perspective taking, and creating an inclusive environment. You can pick one, you can talk about a few. There's no right answer there. And then essay 3 is, we believe Columbia Business School is a very special place. There's some resources that we think are unique to the CBS experience, including our executives and residents. And we ask you to tell us why you feel academically, culturally, and professionally that Columbia Business School is a good fit for you. And that is actually one of my favorite essays to read. I'm glad we didn't change that one this year, because it's really helpful as a reader to get a sense of how you see yourself fitting into the Columbia Business School landscape, and how you're going to spend your time. And I think I'm going to give it over to Morgan now to talk a little bit about FAQs.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us to learn more about Columbia Business School's application process. Like Jordan mentioned, we've made a big change this year for our August entry program, which I'm sure many of you have perhaps noticed on our website already. So for August entry 2024, that application, we have moved to a rounds model. And we wanted to get ahead of all the questions we thought you might be answering today. So that's how we've kind of phrased this first intro to the move to rounds. So why did we do it? To me, there's kind of two reasons that stand out. One is it really aligns us with most of our peer schools in the MBA landscape. And perhaps more importantly, it streamlines the process and makes it easier for you, the applicant. Jordan and I have done rolling for a long time, so it makes sense in our head. And we understand deadlines and rolling and when things might be announced. But for you, the applicant, CBS was perhaps the outlier. And by moving to rounds, we can clearly share application deadlines, potential interview invitation dates, and decision release dates. So we're really hoping this clarity for you, the applicant, removes a bit of the stress and the unknown in a process that can already be a bit stressful and challenging for applicants. So we hope that most of you are happy with the switch to rounds. What does it mean for you? It means we've made a process slightly less confusing and less perhaps arduous to figure out when to apply to CBS. So for those of you that are thinking about August 2024 entry, you will decide whether to apply round 1, round 2, or round 3. Many of you might be thinking, I was going to apply early decision. CBS had early decision for so many years. What do I do now? So we expect round 1 to function fairly similarly to early decision. So I would encourage those of you that had planned to apply an early decision to also apply round 1 to demonstrate similar levels of commitment to CBS. So I hope that piece of advice resonates with the group that might have been a bit maybe disappointed or confused about the early decision removal. And then the last question we wanted to get ahead of would be, when does my application need to be complete to be considered for a particular round? So this is going to be the deadline day. So our early decision deadline, as Jordan and I were joking, we've done info sessions for so many years. I knew I was going to slip up and say early decision. For our round 1 application deadline, September 13th, your application would need to be complete by 11:59 p.m. New York City time that day. That means we need to have your recommendation letter received, all test score materials, etc. So yes, you could wait until September 13th to click submit, but perhaps for peace of mind, you might want to submit a little bit in advance of the deadlines, because then once your application is fully marked as complete, you would get an email notification. So again, my advice would be, and I've given this advice for many, many years, don't wait until the actual deadline day to click submit, just for your own personal stress level. Feel free to get it in a little bit before the deadline, so then you just know we have all those materials. If you submit your application and it's not complete by the deadline, we would ultimately consider it for round 2 or round 3. And obviously, we'll probably do another webinar in April. We would touch more of us on what happens if it's not complete by the round 3 deadline. All right, next slide, please, Jordan. As Jordan alluded to a little bit on the application materials slide, we are also members of the consortium. So some applicants will choose to apply to CBS via the consortium's application. They have a slightly different deadlines. Their early deadline we will consider as part of our round 1 applications, and then their final deadline in January, we will consider as part of our round 2 deadline. So jumping back to the left-hand side of the slide, our January entry application is also live, but we are still rolling on that one. So again, this webinar is focused on the August entry, but a quick comment on January entry for those of you that might have logged in today that have that application ready to go. So January entry is still rolling, meaning once you submit your application and it's complete, we will let you know if you've been invited to interview within 6 weeks. If invited to interview, you would interview typically with an alum. And then once we get the interview report, you would receive a final decision from us in about 2 weeks. Switching gears for the purposes of this presentation is our August entry. Round 1 deadline, September 13th, round 2, January 5th, round 3, April 3rd. This is very similar to most of our peer schools. So again, I hope this helps all of you with your planning purposes, with your personal and professional lives, so you have enough time to submit the application in the round that makes the most sense for you. Like I said, round 1, we expect to function fairly similarly to our previous early decision demonstration of commitment. And then round 2, historically, we have seen many applications come in by that round 2 deadline. So for the folks that apply by round 1 or round 2, we'll get priority consideration for institutional funding. So keep that in mind, please, when you're thinking about which round to apply. That being said, we admit applicants every year that apply on the final deadline. So we will call it round 3 now. We previously called it the final deadline. So every year we admit folks that apply in March or April. And maybe it was a professional change at work. Maybe it was a personal update. And for you at that time, it was the right time to submit your application. So most of you on the webinar right now, I think are planning and getting organized. So we'd love to see your application in round 1 or round 2. But if life gets ahead of you, we will accept applications through round 3. Okay, next slide, please, Jordan. This information is on our website, but we wanted to make sure we talked about it a bit today too. With the shift to rounds, we do anticipate sending our interview invitations around the same time frame. So for those of you that apply round 1 and are complete, we expect to extend interview invitations in mid-October. And then interviews would take place with an alum mid-October to mid-November. You would be able to sign up for an interview slot with an alum. And like Jordan mentioned, it would be a behavioral with a copy of your resume. The committee will then receive all of the interview reports. We will meet for many weeks, and then we plan to release final decisions in mid-December. You can see the timeline. Again, that interview notification would be early to mid-February, and then we expect to release a decision in late March. Round 3, slightly tighter time frame, just 'cause it's the end of the cycle and we want to get folks news, but we expect to invite folks to interview mid to late April, and then you would have your final decision by early May. Depending on the round you are admitted, you would have your deposit deadline either in early February or in late April. But again, all of this information is spelled out on our website, but we felt that this interview timeline was really important to include here in the slide deck today. Getting invited to interview is a positive step in the process. We don't admit everybody we interview, but it is a positive step in the process. It's an opportunity for the alum to get to know you better. And then the committee will look at the application and the interview report before rendering that final decision in December. Thanks, Jordan.
Sorry,
Okay.
I actually had a follow-up question for you, Morgan.
Yes.
I'm wondering if this might be on anyone's mind, and I'll sort of stay on this slide, not go back. But are interviews required to in order to be admitted? Did that stay the same this year?
Yes. So an interview is a required part of the process, and it is by invitation only. So based on your application materials, the committee will decide whether or not to extend an interview invitation. And that would be part of the process to ultimately potentially gain admission. Thank you. I wanted to talk about a couple of the application materials or nuances that we get a ton of questions about. So again, this is me trying to help Nicole and Nick. I see them feverishly answering questions. For applicants that apply directly via Columbia Business School, we have one recommendation letter required. This should be professional in nature. Please give your recommender enough notice to submit their letter to us. You can actually go into the system now, enter their name and email. They'll get an email. They can upload their letter and their business card, and it will just sit electronically in your file until you're ready to, and then when you submit your portion of the application, maybe on September 3rd, it will all be there. So you do not need to wait until you submit your portion of the application for the recommender to submit their letter. And again, as I noted earlier, as you all heard, we are expecting applications to be complete by the deadline day. So please do work with your recommenders, who I'm sure are your professional, you work with professionally on a daily basis, to work with them to get that recommendation in a timely manner, so there's no hiccups in September. We also have an optional essay in addition to the 3 essays that Jordan spoke about. So the optional essay, it really is optional. And it can also be bullet points. It doesn't even need to be a full essay. It could be a paragraph. It could be a couple sentences. And it's there to give you, the applicant, space to share additional information with us or an explanation of something that might not have come out anywhere else in the application. Some common examples are, did you take a leave of absence during undergrad? Is there a semester gap, and why? Did you maybe have a dip in your undergraduate GPA for a term or two? Maybe you were dealing with an illness or a family member was dealing with an illness. On your resume, is there a gap longer than a couple weeks? So again, the optional essay is just really optional. It's an opportunity for you to write us a couple sentences if there's something that's not totally clear in the application, but it's truly optional. The large majority of you will not be submitting it, but it's there if you need it. And then lastly, if you are a reapplicant, just a reminder, if you are a reapplicant from last year, you do not need to do the 3 essays. We would ask you to do the 1 reapplicant essay. And we will actually be doing another webinar to dive a little bit deeper for reapplicants and their questions on August 9th. We admit reapplicants every year. There's no disadvantage to being a reapplicant. Sometimes it just takes another year of maybe professional work or fine-tuning your goals or engaging with CBS. So again, we welcome reapplicants, and don't think you need to craft 3 essays again. You would just do 1. All right. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Jordan.
Okay, so thank you, Morgan. Before we dive into the Q&A, again, there are a lot of good questions coming in. Excited to see them and excited to get to answer some. Wanted to just give some high-level application tips that we really think if you can carry these through the application, you will hopefully be successful. So first and foremost, many of you are probably on your self-reflection journey already, trying to think about what you want to write about in your essays, who you want to pick as your recommender. But I think this is the most important piece of the puzzle, figuring out why is now the time to get your MBA? How will CBS specifically, as I mentioned, our essay question even asks you this essentially, help you achieve those professional and personal goals? Doing that work now, I've talked about this with many students as they're going through the program, and then once they're alums, like doing that now will serve you so much once you're actually a student here, to be able to say, I did this research, this is how I really want to spend my time, and using that as a roadmap, it really, really will serve you, because there's a lot of great things happening at Columbia Business School every single day. And there are amazing classes, there are amazing clubs to join, amazing, general leadership opportunities and ways to engage with the community. And so having a path, even if you deviate from that path a little bit, is really, really important. It's not just for us as the readers and the committee to get a sense of how you want to spend your time. That is part of it, but it really is for you. So take the time that you need to be able to do that. The summer is a great time for that. I think maybe you're sitting by a beach on a week vacation. You can be stressed, or you can just be introspective. So reflect for sure. I find that helps, again, students on their journey. And people do often say they revert back to what they wrote in their essays to make sure they're actually checking all the things off that they want to accomplish at CBS. Be transparent and genuine in your application. Put your best possible foot forward. As Morgan said, we have an optional essay. If there's something you think that we should know and you're comfortable sharing it with us, do. We do want to get to know you. And, there are lots of ways to get to know folks. Some people we will meet on the road. I'll talk about that in a future slide. Some of you will come to campus to meet us, which is great too. But, we really want to get to know you. And there's a lot of ways to do that through writing your essays, through your recommenders, through what you choose to do in your spare time. So please be sure to put your best foot forward and show us that, and only submit your application once you feel that you're doing that, right? If you are targeting round one and you feel like actually you can do better on a standardized test, you want to take one more crack at it, or your essays could use some, fine tuning a little bit more. There is round two, there is round three. As Morgan said, we always admit people around that round three timeframe still. So take the time you need to really, put together the strongest application possible. The interview process, we touched on this a little bit, so I won't spend too much time, but just know that they're another touch point for us to get to know you. Be yourself, be transparent, be genuine. Maybe you might interview with an AO, highly unlikely given how many folks there are coming through the process, but it does happen sometimes. And that is some of the best work that I get to do in my day when that does happen, because it means we get to talk to you and get to understand what makes you tick. So just be yourself. I think that kind of should resonate throughout all of the application. Be yourself, be authentic to who you are. Have someone who knows you, but doesn't maybe know you in a professional context. Read through your essays and your application and say, like, does this speak to the person that you know? Because oftentimes you'll write something and it will actually not at all sound like it's your voice, or won't feel like you, and the people who know you well will be able to call you on that. So definitely use that as a tip. I think oftentimes I hear people say, I asked my aunt who's known me since I'm born, or I asked my grandparent to do it, and it really, really helps. So, okay. I will stop there in terms of the tips, because I'm sure more will come out as we go through the Q&A. So Nick, Nicole, what's going on in the Q&A? What questions should we start with?
Hello, it's very busy over here in the Q&A box. I want to start with the interview format. A lot of different questions around what applicants can expect from the interview process. So Jordan, if you could just give a brief overview of how the interview process works. Are they virtual? Are they on campus? Where are these taking place? And again, what can applicants expect?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. So if you're applying to many schools, this is actually going to be different at every school you apply to. So I'm going to speak specifically for Columbia Business School for the August 2024 entry. We expect all of our interviews will be conducted virtually, and 9 times out of 10, they will be conducted by an alum virtually. Like I said, there might be a rare occasion where you're interviewed by an admissions officer, but for August 2024, we anticipate virtual alum interviews. And like we've said, they will be behavioral in nature. They are not case-based. They are not supposed to have gotcha moments. They're really a conversation between you and the alum to talk about what's on your resume, what you maybe want to do with your time at CBS. I mean, all the things that you wrote in your application, while the alum won't have seen your application, you should be prepared to talk about how you want to spend your time at Columbia Business School, what you want to do professionally post MBA, what you hope to do for an internship in theory, what clubs you want to engage with, what courses you want to take, what professors you're interested in. All of these things I think are fair game for an alum to ask about. So just be prepared the way you would be prepared for a job interview.
Hi there, guys. I just wanted to jump in to ask a question. Maybe Morgan can answer this one. If I'm applying to the August entry MBA program and I'd like to be considered for institutional funding from Columbia Business School, how should I time my application? What round should I be looking at?
Thanks, Nick. So Columbia Business School provides institutional funding, a variety of forms for our admitted students. So we would encourage applicants that want to receive full consideration for institutional funding to apply in round 1 or round 2. We would follow up with students with more logistics later this fall, but for your target timelines, for those interested in receiving institutional funding, please do plan to apply for priority consideration in round 1 and round 2.
Thank you, Morgan. Another common theme coming up in the Q&A box is lots of questions around the consortium. So maybe Jordan, do you mind just giving a brief overview as to what the consortium is, who is eligible, and how are these applications being reviewed?
Absolutely. I actually thought it might be helpful. Maybe we'll like pop back to this slide so people can visualize it. So the consortium is a organization that we are a member of. I think there's now 23 schools who are committed to the consortium's mission of diversifying the ranks of business schools and business writ large. So eligibility wise, it's written here, you must be a US citizen or a US permanent resident who demonstrates a commitment to the consortium's mission. It is a very eloquently written, robust mission. So I would encourage you to take a peek if you align with the consortium's mission, and then consider applying via the consortium if you do. Students of all races and ethnicities are welcome to apply. And the application deadlines, like Morgan said, while they are a little different, so excuse me, the early deadline is October 15th. We will loop those who apply through the consortium early deadline into round 1. And you would follow the same process once we receive your application. They're just received at a later timeline. So still reviewed by readers, still go through an interview, still reviewed by the committee as part of the round. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I would encourage folks to review the consortium's website. Like I said, we are one of 23 schools that are part. It is, for those of you who maybe applied to United States undergrad institutions, it has a similar feel to a like common application. You submit one application and then do supplemental essays and criteria for each school that you're interested in applying for. But certainly check out their website for more information.
Thanks for that, Jordan. I'm going to throw a question at Morgan right now. We had a couple questions about this in the chat, but talking about the letter of recommendation in the application, if someone does not have their direct supervisor writing the recommendation, Morgan, how does the admissions committee view that, and how should they explain that to us in the application?
Thanks, Nick, for bringing that up. So if you're not using your direct, so the ideal choice would be your current direct supervisor. They work with you on a daily basis. They can speak to your professional skills and growth the best. However, we recognize it's not always possible to use your current direct supervisor. Maybe you have a brand new boss, or maybe you've just switched jobs. So if you want to use a former supervisor, that's also fine. Maybe you work for a family business. So you actually, and your supervisor is a family member, so you should actually not use a family member. So for those of you that maybe work for a family business, we recommend maybe a client or a board member, just somebody who is not a family member, just somebody who can speak to your professional abilities. And then in the recommendation section, there's a very short question that says, if you're not providing a rec letter from your current direct supervisor, please tell us why. So it could be, I have a brand new boss, or I can't tell my boss because then I won't be eligible for my bonus, perhaps. So again, we want you to obviously have a good working relationship at your job. So just give us a brief sentence of why we don't have it from your direct supervisor, and then work to have another professional letter of reference submitted to us, perhaps by a former supervisor, a senior colleague, client, etc.
And I just want to stay with the letter recommendation for a moment. Morgan, can you talk a little bit about the new business card requirement? Just logistically, why we're asking for it, and if someone doesn't have an official business card, how can they approach this part of the application requirements?
So the business card just helps us get a sense of who the professional recommendation is coming from, the organization, and their title. We've noticed sometimes that they just sign the record. Sometimes it's not on letterhead. Ideally, your recommendation letter would be on letterhead, but if it's but it may not be, so that's fine. So the business card just gives us a snapshot of who the recommender is and who they work for. We also know many organizations are moving away from business cards. So maybe they take a screenshot of the signature from their email line. Maybe they take a screenshot from their profile if they have an about us on their website. If you really are struggling with a specific situation, feel free to send us an email and we can help with you individually. But again, this is not meant to complicate things. It's just to give the committee a sense of who the recommender is in a clear fashion.
Thanks so much for that, Morgan. Jordan, I'd like to ask you a question. Going back to our new round system and the timing of applications, could you talk a little bit about what happens if I'm aiming to submit my application for round one, but things just aren't quite ready yet? I don't get my test score in time. I'm still working on the essays. I'm not able to meet that deadline. What happens to my application?
Absolutely. So we anticipate that what will happen to that application is it will roll into the next round. So for round one, you would sort of roll into round two. You would then need to follow the deadlines for round two, which is January 5th. And should that happen for round two, same thing for round three. And should that happen for round three, that's something that we would communicate with the applicant specifically about to determine whether they, what the next steps are. More likely than not, we would encourage that person to apply the following year, given April 3rd is the last round we have, that deadline for round three. But I just want to reiterate again, because it looks like I was just peeking through the Q&A. We no longer are on rolling admissions. So early decision is no longer something that exists. Regular decision, we are not using that language anymore. So that's sort of the reason Morgan and I wanted to get on the call today, to just make sure that applicants really, really understood that we are moving to this rounds model, and that long gone are the days of rolling admissions. So while we will roll your application over round to round, right? We're not doing rolling admissions in the same way we had for the many years that we've been here before.
Thank you, Jordan. So a question I've seen a couple of times, and Jordan, you mentioned in the beginning, combined, we think that you and Morgan have about 16 years of experience reading these applications. So can you shed some light on common, mistakes you see, common pitfalls? What is your advice for applicants to, put their best foot forward in this process? And I would love to hear from both of you on this if possible.
I think the one thing that stands out to me a lot is just the strength, or maybe not as strong, essays. We are, as Jordan talked about, we really are thoughtful in our essay selection. So we don't just pick 3 essays so we can have you answer, any question. We've been thoughtful of why we've selected these 3 questions, touching on personal, professional, and extracurricular kind of an interest in CBS. So really do take the time to answer our questions specifically. We're friends with all of our peer schools. We know their essay questions too. So we can kind of tell when an essay question has just been tweaked from another school. So start with a blank slate. Give yourself enough time to answer our questions directly. They're not meant to be tricky. I think they are straightforward. Just answer the question. And I think that will really help you put together strong essays during your application process.
Sort of something to complement that, I think it's very obvious to me as a reader when someone selects a recommender who doesn't really know them. who they selected because they have a big title at the company they work for, or, worked with them one time and thinks, the person thinks that the applicant thinks that they can speak to the applicant's skill set. I think the recommendation really complements the rest of the application in a helpful way to us. So picking someone and being thoughtful about that is really important. And we can sort of tell when this person really knows the applicant, the recommender really knows the applicant, and when they don't. So that would be my tip.
Thanks so much for that, both of you. Jordan, question for you. I'd like to follow up with you about test scores. We've got a couple questions about that. Which test scores do we accept? Do we have a preference for a particular exam format? And also, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how we look at that in the application, how we weigh someone's test score.
Yes, so we accept the GMAT, GRE, or executive assessment. You should select and take the test that you feel you can perform the best on. We have no preference whatsoever. We accept all three happily. It is a holistic review process for Columbia Business School admissions review. So we are not just looking at your test score. We are not just looking at your undergrad GPA. I saw some questions about that in the Q&A. Like, I didn't do so well in undergrad. What do I do? The answer to that is try to do the best you can on your standardized test, but also showcase how you're going to contribute to Columbia, potentially outside of the classroom. And your undergrad experience is in the past. There's nothing you can really do about that at that point. So think about moving forward, how you can put your best foot forward. But it's one piece. The standardized test is one piece of the puzzle that we're looking at. An important piece because it does help us assess potential success in the classroom, but not the only way for us to assess that. So keep that in the back of your mind. We actually look very favorably upon those who take the test more than once. I think there's some myth out there that admissions committees expect you to perform the best you possibly can on your first try at a standardized test, and that is just unreasonable, and not true. We don't expect you to do the best you possibly can. In fact, most people don't on their first try. So take a few shots at it, try a couple of times. Don't make yourself crazy, but try a couple of times and see how it goes. If you know you can do better than you performed on one or two of the tests, try again. So it's one piece, but an important one.
Thank you. A little bit of a different topic I'd like to pivot to. Morgan, can you talk a little bit about reapplicants? I know we're going to have a webinar later this summer, but there's a ton of questions in the chat. So want to just give some people peace of mind. How do we view reapplicants? Can you also just talk through the logistics if they applied last year, which essay needs to be written versus if they applied in years prior to 2023?
So for a reapplicant, if you applied last year and were not offered admission, you are a reapplicant this year with the requirements of one reapplicant essay. So you do not need to, nor I don't even think the system will let you submit the 3 essays. So you'll do the one reapplicant essay, kind of highlighting what has changed in the past year. And then you are also required to provide one new recommendation letter from not the recommender you used the previous year. So maybe this is another senior colleague or a different manager. So we would be asking for one new rec letter. The file will be reviewed by the committee just as a first-time applicant. We'll see that you're a reapplicant. So again, I know I tell reapplicants a lot. I love to see maybe recent engagement with CBS. We do a ton of virtual events. So what have you done in the past year to continue to get to know CBS? Or how have you fine-tuned your professional goals? Or is it just the timing of your application that has changed? So like I said, we do admit reapplicants all of the time. You're not at a negative, you're not at a disadvantage to be a reapplicant. I think I heard you also say, Nicole, so if you are a reapplicant though from say 2 years ago, so let's say you applied for August 2022 entry, and you were not offered admission for August 2022 entry, and now you are reapplying for August 2024 entry, we would ask for the 3 essays this cycle. So again, definitely log in on August 9th. Jordan and her team will dig even deeper into that.
Thank you so much for that, Morgan. And Jordan, just to ask you, just one last question, because I know we're kind of getting up against the time here, just to bring it all the way back to rounds and sort of the reason for this session. Could you just briefly touch on, big picture here? Is there a huge difference between applying as soon as possible, as soon as the application opens, versus applying closer to this round 1 deadline or round 2 or round 3 deadline? And also, if this session has left folks excited about applying, when can they apply? When does the application open?
Yes, great question. I'm going to answer the second part first. The application is open. The application opened on Monday for August 2024 entry. So you can apply now. Now, to answer the first part of your question, you do not need to apply right now. Morgan said, and it's true, don't wait until the deadline, but you do not have to apply. There's no advantage to applying right now, given our round 1 deadline is September 13th. We will not start reviewing applications until after that deadline. So the way we used to do things was we would start to review right away. We are not doing that anymore. So it is not to your advantage to apply, 6 weeks, unless your application is ready and you just want to be like, done, I'm done. I don't need to worry anymore. CBS check. That is your prerogative, but there's no advantage. One thing that I think is important to note is if you do submit your application, August 30th, you will be considered for round 1. It's not like you can submit your application then and expect to be considered for round 2. There's no way for you to differentiate. If you submit by a specific deadline, so by the 13th of September, by January 5th, you will be considered for that in between, I guess, let's put it this way. If you submit by September 13th, you're going to be considered for round 1. If you submit September 14th to January 5th, you're going to be considered for round 2. So on. So, it's just important for folks to understand that that's applying to CBS directly. Again, the consortium is a little different. We will be looping that early deadline into round 1, and then the second deadline is the same as our round 2. So big picture, put together the best application you possibly can and submit it when it's ready. Don't worry about getting it in now to be like the early bird, because there's no real advantage to doing that. And I think that was actually our last question, Nick. So thank you both. Morgan mentioned this briefly, but we thought it would be fruitful for folks to get a sense of how you can engage with us, since that is sort of an important piece of the puzzle, not only for reapplicants, but also for first-time applicants, because it's really important to get a sense of why Columbia might be a good fit for you. So our admissions office is open via email and phone, starting at 9 a.m., 5 days a week. And then we are open to walk-in visitors Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So that is the case for nearly all the days in the year, but there are some days around holidays, etc., where we might be closed. So just check the website. Usually in like big bold letters at the top, it will say like office closed this day if we are closed. And you can always call or email us to check if we're open on a day that you're hoping to walk in. But we also have a ton of events that we're hosting. So if you want to build a day to come to campus, we have class visits, we have campus visits pretty much every Monday and Thursday. Events virtually, like I said at the top. This is not meant to be an information session. I saw some questions about the academics and questions about clubs. Tune into a virtual info session for that. They happen once a month. And then we are on the road. So I think members of our team are, traveling in Asia, in all around the US this week specifically, but we're going everywhere. So we hope to meet you where you are. If you can't necessarily come to meet us, all of that is available on our events page. And then finally, I saw some questions about how to connect with current students. Our Hermes Society Contact a Student page is linked here below, but also if you just put into Google Columbia Business School Contact a Student, it will pop up. And that is a database of student ambassadors who are excited to talk to prospective students on a whole host of topics. And you'll be able to find folks who align with maybe your interests that you can talk to learn more about CBS resources. And with that, that's the end of my slides. So I want to take an opportunity to thank you for joining. Thank you for your interest in Columbia Business School. Thank you to Morgan, Nick, and Nicole for partnering with me on this event. And we hope to see you sometime soon, either on campus or on the road or virtually. And then we hope to see your application in this coming cycle. And thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.